this episode, we begin with one of the biggest ideas in the whole certified in Risk and Information Systems Control (CRISC) journey, because enterprise risk management (ERM) and the risk management framework (RMF) explain how an organization thinks about uncertainty in a disciplined, connected way instead of reacting to isolated problems one at a time. For a beginner, these terms can sound formal and even a little intimidating, but the core idea is very practical. Organizations face risk from many directions at once, including technology failures, legal obligations, operational mistakes, vendor issues, security events, strategic decisions, and changes in the market around them. If each team handles risks separately without a common structure, leadership can end up with blind spots, duplicated effort, inconsistent priorities, and a false sense of control. ERM and NRMF are important because they give the organization a way to see risk across the business, connect it to objectives, assign accountability, and make decisions that are more consistent over time. Once that picture becomes clear, risk management stops looking like scattered defensive work and starts looking like a disciplined part of how the business is run. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A simple way to understand ERM is to think of it as the organization-wide approach to identifying, understanding, evaluating, and managing risk in support of business objectives. The key phrase there is organization-wide. This is what separates ERM from the narrower idea that risk is just a problem for one department, one manager, or one technical team. In a mature environment, leadership wants a broader view of uncertainty because financial, operational, legal, strategic, and technology risks often affect one another even when they appear to start in different places. A vendor failure can become a customer trust problem, a data quality issue can become a financial reporting issue, and a rushed strategic initiative can create control weaknesses that later turn into regulatory trouble. ERM helps leaders see those relationships rather than judging each concern in isolation. That is why it matters so much in CRISC. The certification wants you to think beyond technical incidents and toward the larger question of how the whole business makes consistent decisions about uncertainty, exposure, and accountability. NRMF is the structure that helps turn that broad ambition into something repeatable. If ERM is the enterprise view of risk, then the framework is the organized method that helps people carry that view into daily practice. It provides a common way to identify risks, analyze them, report them, assign owners, choose responses, and monitor whether those responses are still working. Without a framework, risk management easily becomes informal and personality-driven. One team may be methodical, another may be reactive, and a third may ignore issues until pressure becomes too great to avoid them. That makes leadership oversight much harder because the organization is not speaking one risk language or following one decision pattern. A framework reduces that inconsistency by giving the business a shared structure. This does not mean every risk looks identical or every department behaves in the exact same way. It means the organization has a consistent method for asking the right questions, documenting the answers, and making sure important exposures are visible and governed rather than left to chance. One of the most important things to understand is why organizations need ERM instead of relying only on local or departmental risk management. The short answer is that large and even mid-sized businesses are too interconnected for isolated decision-making to work reliably. A department may optimize its own priorities in a way that harms the enterprise, or a team may accept a risk locally without realizing that the same type of exposure exists across several units at once. Leadership needs a broader view because the organization shares assets, customers, infrastructure, legal obligations, reputation, and strategic goals. A decision that appears efficient inside one group may create unacceptable exposure somewhere else. ERM helps make those connections visible so that leaders are not surprised by patterns that were technically known in pieces but never understood as a whole. For a beginner, this is a very important shift in thinking. Risk does not stay in neat boxes just because the organization chart does. The enterprise view matters because the business experiences consequences at the whole business level, even when the original issue began in only one process, system, or decision. Another central idea is that ERM begins with business objectives, not with fear. This point matters because many people first encounter risk through negative scenarios and start to think risk management is mainly about stopping bad things from happening. That is only part of the picture. A mature organization manages risk so it can pursue goals intelligently, not so it can hide from change or eliminate all uncertainty from existence. Growth plans, new products, partnerships, mergers, cloud adoption, automation, and geographic expansion all involve risk, but businesses still pursue them because opportunity and uncertainty usually travel together. ERM helps leadership decide what kinds of uncertainty are acceptable, what needs stronger treatment, and what requires closer oversight before action continues. In that sense, ERM supports performance as much as protection. It helps the organization move forward with eyes open. CRISC wants learners to understand this balance because mature risk thinking is not simply defensive. It is about helping the business make better choices where goals, exposure, cost, and responsibility all meet. Because ERM starts with the business, governance plays a major role in making it effective. Governance gives the organization direction, oversight, accountability, and decision boundaries. Without governance, ERM would just be a collection of risk discussions with no clear authority behind them. Leadership needs to define expectations for how risk is identified, escalated, reported, reviewed, and acted upon. It also needs to clarify who owns business objectives, who supports risk analysis, who can approve certain responses, and how major concerns move upward when they exceed normal tolerance. This is why ERM belongs so naturally inside Domain 1. It does not float separately from governance. It depends on governance to establish legitimacy and consistency. For a beginner, this is useful because it keeps the topic grounded. ERM is not a magical overlay placed on top of the organization. It is part of how leadership governs the business. The stronger the governance environment, the more likely the enterprise risk approach will be trusted, supported, and used in ways that influence real decisions instead of becoming an empty reporting ritual. Risk appetite and risk tolerance also become much easier to understand when placed inside ERM. Risk appetite refers to the general level of risk an organization is willing to pursue or accept in order to achieve its goals, while risk tolerance helps define the acceptable range around specific objectives, activities, or conditions. These ideas matter because an enterprise cannot manage risk well if nobody knows where the boundaries are. Teams need to understand when a situation is within normal decision space and when it requires escalation or reconsideration. ERM helps leadership set those boundaries in a way that connects to strategy, resources, obligations, and the business environment. A fast-growing company may accept more uncertainty in some areas than a heavily regulated public institution, but both still need clarity about what is acceptable and what is not. Without that clarity, risk decisions become inconsistent and emotional. With it, leaders can explain why one exposure was accepted, another reduced, and another escalated. CRISC emphasizes these ideas because mature risk management depends on defined limits rather than vague intentions or personal comfort levels. A strong RMF usually includes a cycle of activities that the organization repeats over time, even though the exact design may vary by enterprise. Risks need to be identified, analyzed, prioritized, responded to, and then monitored so leadership can tell whether the chosen approach is working. This cyclical nature matters because risk management is not a one-time event completed when a document is approved or a meeting ends. Conditions change. Business priorities shift. Vendors evolve. Systems age. Threats adapt. People leave. Regulations move. A framework exists in part to make sure the organization does not treat yesterday's assessment as sufficient for tomorrow's conditions. For a beginner, it helps to think of the framework as a disciplined loop. The organization looks for uncertainty, judges what it means, decides what to do, checks the results, and then returns to the beginning as the environment changes. That loop is one of the most practical things CRISC teaches. It turns risk management from a reactive conversation into an ongoing management discipline that supports continuity, learning, and better decisions over time. Risk identification inside an enterprise framework is more than brainstorming bad possibilities. It is the process of recognizing where uncertainty could interfere with objectives across the business. That can include operational problems, strategic decisions, market changes, third-party dependencies, compliance pressures, technology failures, talent shortages, fraud, privacy concerns, and information security issues. The important point is that identification should be grounded in the realities of the organization rather than driven only by headlines or habit. A company should understand its business processes, assets, major initiatives, dependencies, and change pressures well enough to ask where meaningful exposure exists. This is where the enterprise view adds value. It helps leaders spot themes and patterns that might not be obvious within a single function. Several small issues across different teams may actually point to one larger weakness in culture, change management, vendor oversight, or governance. CRISC wants you to think this way because real risk management improves when the business can move beyond isolated symptoms and start seeing connected sources of exposure that deserve broader attention. Once a risk is identified, the framework helps the organization assess and prioritize it in a way that supports decision-making. Assessment looks at factors such as likelihood, impact, timing, dependencies, control strength, and the effect on business objectives. Prioritization matters because no organization has unlimited time, money, or attention. Leadership has to decide what needs immediate action, what can be monitored, what can be accepted within approved limits, and what requires deeper analysis before response choices are made. helps ensure that prioritization reflects enterprise impact rather than only local discomfort. A department may feel strongly about its own issue, but the broader framework helps compare that issue to other exposures across the business and align action with overall business significance. This is one reason the enterprise approach is so valuable. It protects leadership from making decisions based only on whoever speaks the loudest or most urgently. Instead, the framework supports a more disciplined comparison of risks in relation to strategy, critical processes, legal obligations, and organizational resilience. Risk response is where the framework turns understanding into action. After the organization has identified and analyzed a risk, it must decide what to do about it. Possible responses may include reducing exposure through stronger controls or process changes, accepting the risk if it falls within approved boundaries, transferring part of the exposure through contractual arrangements or insurance, or avoiding the activity if the risk is too great for the expected value. What matters in CRISC is not memorizing those categories as abstract vocabulary. What matters is understanding that the response should fit the business context and be tied to ownership, cost, timing, and expected benefit. The enterprise framework helps keep response choices consistent by giving leaders a structured way to compare options and document why a certain path was selected. Without that discipline, response decisions can become reactive, exaggerated, or poorly aligned with business priorities. The framework does not eliminate judgment. It supports judgment by making sure the organization asks the same core questions before acting and keeps those answers visible for oversight later. Monitoring is another essential piece because a response is not the end of risk management. The organization must continue watching whether controls remain effective, whether conditions are changing, whether residual risk is still acceptable, and whether new information should alter an earlier decision. Monitoring also helps reveal whether issues are being closed in name only or whether actual exposure is going down. In an enterprise setting, this is especially important because leadership often relies on summarized reporting rather than direct operational visibility. If the framework does not include meaningful monitoring, the enterprise may believe it has managed a risk when it has only documented an intention to do so. A strong RMF, therefore, includes some way to review metrics, trends, issue status, control performance, and business changes over time. For a beginner, this is a useful reminder that is not about producing a polished risk register and moving on. It is about keeping risk information alive enough that the organization can adjust when reality changes and avoid confusing paperwork with actual control. Roles and responsibilities are what make work in practice. Leadership provides direction and oversight. Business owners understand how risk affects objectives. Managers support execution. Specialized teams provide analysis and control expertise, and independent assurance functions help test whether the overall system is working as intended. The exact design may vary, but the principle remains the same. Risk management fails quickly when accountability is vague. If everyone touches risk, but nobody owns the outcome, important issues can sit in place while teams assume someone else is addressing them. NRMF helps prevent that by clarifying who identifies, who analyzes, who decides, who approves, who monitors, and who reports. This matters because enterprise risk management is not just a method. It is a coordinated set of responsibilities that has to function across the organization. CRISC cares deeply about this because it trains learners to see risk not only as a technical or analytical problem, but as a governance and accountability problem. Good frameworks make responsibility clearer, and clearer responsibility makes decisions more defensible and follow-through more reliable. A common misconception is that ERM and NRMF exist mainly to create more meetings, more documents, and more bureaucracy. In a weak implementation, that can certainly happen, but that is not the purpose of the approach. At its best, ERM helps organizations reduce surprise, improve prioritization, support better leadership decisions, and align risk handling with business purpose. Another misconception is that enterprise risk management belongs only to large corporations with complex reporting structures. Smaller organizations also face interconnected risks, even if their framework is simpler. The key is not size. The key is whether the organization needs a consistent way to understand uncertainty across functions and make accountable decisions about it. A final misconception is that ERM is separate from cybersecurity, when in fact cybersecurity risk is often one of the most visible parts of enterprise risk because it touches operations, legal obligations, customer trust, and strategic execution all at once. CRISC wants learners to understand that information risk is most useful when it is managed as part of the larger business picture, not as a separate technical silo. By the end of this discussion, the larger picture should be clear. Enterprise risk management gives the organization a broad, connected way to think about uncertainty in support of its objectives, while a risk management framework gives it the structure to carry that thinking into consistent practice. Together, they help leadership understand where exposure exists, how it relates to business goals, who is accountable, what response options make sense, and how to keep watching as conditions change. That is why this topic matters so much in the certification. It teaches that mature risk management is not just about recognizing danger. It is about building an enterprise discipline that connects governance, analysis, response, monitoring, and ownership into one repeatable system. When that system works, the organization becomes more capable of making decisions with clarity rather than guesswork. When it fails, even intelligent teams can end up working hard in separate directions without giving leadership the coherent view it needs. That is the foundation this topic is meant to establish, and it will keep showing up throughout everything that follows.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.